the silence was deafening. For months, the world had whispered, speculated, and worried. Headlines screamed questions that no one dared ask directly. Palace gates remained closed to curious eyes, while behind them, one of the most beloved figures in modern royalty fought a battle that would forever change not just her life, but the very fabric of the monarchy itself. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned royal watchers, challenge centuries of tradition, and prove that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from wearing a crown, but from taking it off long enough to find yourself again. This is the story of how Princess Catherine's silence became the loudest voice the royal family had ever heard, and why her journey back to health would leave both royalty and millions of ordinary people around the world forever changed. The truth was far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The morning of January 17 started like any other at Adelaide Cottage. Catherine woke before dawn, as she always did, to steal a few precious moments of quiet before her children stirred. The frost on the windows caught the early light, creating patterns that reminded her of the lace on her wedding dress all those years ago. She had no idea this would be the last normal morning she would have for months to come. By 6:30 a.m., the cottage was alive with the familiar chaos of 3 children getting ready for school. George, now 11, was frantically searching for his mathematics homework while Charlotte helped her younger brother Louis find his missing rugby boot. Catherine moved through the morning routine with practiced ease, making packed lunches and checking school bags, her hands steady even as something deep inside her whispered that all was not well. The pain had been building for weeks, but she had pushed it aside as she always did. There were royal engagements to attend, charity events to host, and a kingdom that expected to see their Princess of Wales smiling and waving. The art of appearing perfect while struggling inside was something she had learned well over the years. It was a skill that had served her through scandals, media storms, and the endless pressure of life under the world's most scrutinizing spotlight. William noticed her wince as she lifted Louis's school bag, but when he asked if she was all right, Catherine simply smiled and changed the subject to their upcoming trip to Windsor. This was their way, protecting each other from worry, maintaining the calm surface that their children and the world needed to see. Neither of them realized they were about to be pulled into a storm that would test everything they thought they knew about duty, family, and survival. After the school run, Catherine returned to her private office at Kensington Palace for what should have been a routine morning of correspondence and meeting preparation. Her private secretary, Natasha, noticed that the princess seemed quieter than usual, her usual warm greetings replaced by polite nods. The stack of letters from children around the Commonwealth sat unopened on her desk, something that never happened, as Catherine made it a point to personally read every letter from young well-wishers. The first official sign that something was wrong came during a video call with the team at the Royal Foundation. Catherine, who was known for her meticulous preparation and thoughtful questions, seemed distracted. She excused herself twice during the 30-minute call, and, when she returned the second time, her face was noticeably pale. The meeting was cut short when she quietly asked if they could reschedule, citing a scheduling conflict that her team knew didn't exist. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's private physician, received an urgent call that afternoon. The woman on the other end of the line was not the composed Princess of Wales the world knew, but a concerned mother and wife who had finally admitted that something was very wrong. The pain had become impossible to ignore, accompanied by symptoms that sent immediate alarm bells ringing through the medical professional's mind. Within hours, Catherine found herself in a private consulting room at the London Clinic, a place where discretion was valued as highly as medical expertise. The initial examination confirmed her worst fears. This was not something that could be fixed with rest and painkillers. Urgent tests were ordered, and, for the first time since becoming a member of the royal family, Catherine faced the possibility that her body might betray the duty she had sworn to uphold. The drive back to Kensington Palace that evening was silent. William gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary while Catherine stared out at the familiar streets of London, wondering how many more times she might see them. The weight of unspoken fears filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating. They had faced many challenges together, the death of his mother, the pressures of royal life, the intense media scrutiny, but this felt different. This was a battle they might not be able to win through careful planning and public duty. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine sat in her dressing room surrounded by the evidence of her royal life. Designer gowns hung in neat rows, each one carrying memories of state dinners, charity galas, and official visits. Tiaras that had belonged to Diana sparkled in their cases, waiting for occasions that might never come. For the first time, these symbols of privilege and duty felt more like a burden than a blessing. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Dr. Mitchell's voice was professional but kind as she delivered results that no one wanted to hear. Surgery would be necessary, and soon. The word cancer hung in the air like a physical presence, reshaping everything it touched. Catherine's first thought was not for herself, but for her children. How would she tell them? How could she protect them from the fear that was already consuming her? The decision to keep the diagnosis private was immediate and unanimous. Too many members of the royal family had faced their health battles under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Catherine had watched as speculation about every medical appointment, every cancelled engagement, every moment of apparent weakness had been dissected by the media and turned into entertainment for the masses. She would not allow her children to grow up reading tabloid theories about their mother's condition. Palace Communications Director Amanda Foster found herself in an impossible position. How do you explain the sudden withdrawal of one of the monarchy's most active and beloved members without revealing information the family has chosen to keep private? The initial statement was carefully crafted to reveal as little as possible while buying time for Catherine to process her diagnosis and prepare for treatment. The surgery date was set for late January, just 2 weeks away. In those 14 days, Catherine threw herself into what she privately called her goodbye tour, though she told no one else of this name. She spent extra time reading bedtime stories to Louis, helped Charlotte practice piano with unusual patience, and listened with genuine attention as George explained the complexities of his latest school project. These moments, ordinary and precious, took on new significance as she faced the possibility they might be numbered. William struggled with his own fears while trying to maintain normalcy for their children. His natural tendency was to retreat into duty when faced with emotional crisis, but Catherine's situation demanded something different. She needed a husband, not a future king. The internal conflict between these roles would define much of his journey through the coming months. Friends noticed he seemed more serious than usual, but attributed it to the usual pressures of royal life. The night before surgery, Catherine walked through their private gardens at Adelaide Cottage, memorizing details she had taken for granted. The way the moonlight caught the bare branches of the old oak tree, the sound of the wind chimes William had hung for her birthday, the scent of winter air carrying promises of spring that she might not live to see. These sensory memories would later become anchors during the darkest moments of her recovery. Her mother, Carol Middleton, arrived that evening to help with the children's morning routine. The conversation between mother and daughter was brief but profound. Carol, who had watched her daughter transform from a university student into a global icon, now saw her simply as her child who was afraid. The royal protocol that usually guided their interactions fell away, replaced by the basic human need for a mother's comfort. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she wrote 3 letters, one for each of her children, to be given to them if something went wrong during surgery. The words came slowly, as she struggled to capture everything she wanted them to know about life, love, and the strength she knew they carried within them. These letters, which would never need to be delivered, represented her deepest fears and her greatest hopes for their futures. The last entry in her private diary before surgery was simple but profound. Tomorrow I stop being the Princess of Wales and become just Catherine again. I pray that will be enough to survive what's coming. Little did she know that this stripping away of royal identity would prove to be exactly what she needed to find the strength for the battle ahead. William sat beside her as she fell asleep, watching the peaceful expression on her face and wondering if this might be the last time he would see her without the shadow of illness hanging over them. In a few hours, their carefully constructed life would be placed in the hands of surgeons, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The London Clinic's private wing was designed for discretion, but nothing could hide the gravity of what was about to unfold. Catherine arrived at 5:30 a.m. through a service entrance, her security detail having planned the route to avoid any possibility of media attention. She wore a simple navy coat and carried only a small overnight bag containing items that connected her to home: a photograph of the children, William's old university sweater, and a worn copy of a poetry book her father had given her years ago. Dr. James Crawford, the surgeon who would lead Catherine's operation, had performed hundreds of similar procedures, but never under such intense secrecy. The operating theater was cleared of all non-essential personnel, and even the medical team had signed additional confidentiality agreements. As Catherine was prepared for surgery, she thought not of the crowds who had cheered for her or the duties waiting for her return, but of Charlotte's laugh and the way Louis still reached for her hand when crossing busy streets. William spent those long hours in a private waiting room, staring at walls that had witnessed the fears of countless other families. He found himself remembering their wedding day, how calm and radiant Catherine had been as she walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, how her smile had steadied his nerves in front of 2 billion viewers. Now he could only wait and hope that same inner strength would carry her through this battle. The surgery revealed the full extent of what they were facing. Dr. Crawford emerged after 4 hours with news that was both better and worse than expected. The operation had been successful, but the pathology results would determine the next steps. For now, Catherine would need to focus on healing, but the possibility of additional treatment loomed over everything like a dark cloud. Recovery was unlike anything Catherine had experienced. The woman who had given birth to 3 children with characteristic grace and dignity now found herself weak, disoriented, and completely dependent on others for the most basic needs. The private hospital room became her world, 4 walls that contained her fears, her pain, and, slowly, her determination to fight back. The first few days were a blur of medications and monitored sleep. When Catherine was finally alert enough to have visitors, she made a decision that surprised everyone: she wanted to see the children. Palace officials worried about the security implications and the emotional impact on George, Charlotte, and Louis, but Catherine was firm. If she was going to fight this battle, she needed to remember what she was fighting for. The children's visit to the hospital was carefully orchestrated. They arrived through the same discreet entrance their mother had used, but their excitement at seeing her was impossible to contain. Louis, only 5 years old, climbed carefully onto the hospital bed and declared that the machines monitoring his mother's recovery looked like robots. Charlotte, ever observant, noticed that her mother's famous hair was hidden under a soft cap, but said nothing, sensing this was something they shouldn't discuss. George, mature beyond his 10 years, understood more than his siblings about the seriousness of the situation. He had overheard hushed phone conversations and noticed the way adults stopped talking when he entered rooms. During their visit, he sat close to his mother's bedside and told her about his school projects with unusual detail, as if the normalcy of his stories could somehow make everything all right again. After the children left, Catherine experienced her first moment of complete breakdown. The effort of appearing strong for her family had exhausted what little energy she had recovered. Alone in her hospital room, she finally allowed herself to cry, not the dignified tears she had mastered for public moments of emotion, but raw, ugly sobs that came from a place deeper than royal training could reach. William found her like this when he returned that evening, and, for the first time since her diagnosis, they talked honestly about their fears. Catherine admitted she was terrified not just of dying, but of becoming a burden, of failing in her duties, of letting down the millions of people who looked to her for inspiration. William confessed his own terror of losing the woman who had transformed him from a reluctant prince into someone who actually believed in the power of the monarchy to do good. The pathology results arrived on a Thursday morning that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. Dr. Crawford delivered the news with practiced compassion: additional treatment would be necessary. The word chemotherapy introduced a new chapter to their story, one that would test everything they thought they knew about strength, privacy, and what it meant to serve the public while fighting for your own survival. Catherine's first thought upon hearing about chemotherapy was characteristically selfless: how would this affect the children's school schedule? Could she time her treatment cycles around their important events? Dr. Crawford gently explained that her health would need to take priority over everything else, a concept that felt foreign to someone whose entire adult life had been defined by putting duty before personal needs. The decision about how much to reveal to the public became increasingly complex as Catherine's treatment plan took shape. The initial palace statement about planned abdominal surgery would no longer be sufficient to explain her extended absence from royal duties. Yet the family's desire for privacy remained absolute, particularly as they faced the reality that recovery would be measured in months, not weeks. Palace communications found themselves in uncharted territory. Previous royal health crises had either been quickly resolved or had involved older members of the family whose reduced public schedules could more easily accommodate health challenges. Catherine, at 42 and at the height of her active royal career, presented a unique situation that challenged traditional approaches to royal transparency. The Queen Consort, Camilla, visited Catherine during her second week in the hospital, bringing with her the wisdom of someone who had navigated royal life's challenges for decades. Their conversation remained private, but those close to the family noticed a shift in Catherine's demeanor afterward. There was a new resolve in her expression, as if she had been reminded of something important about her role and her own resilience. Media speculation during this period reached fever pitch. Catherine's absence from planned engagements was noticed immediately by royal watchers, and the vague nature of palace communications only fueled more intense scrutiny. Photographers stationed themselves near the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of arriving family members. Social media buzzed with theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd, each rumor adding to the pressure on Catherine and William to either reveal more information or endure continued speculation. The decision to return home to Adelaide Cottage came after 10 days in the hospital. Catherine was still weak and would need weeks of home recovery before beginning outpatient chemotherapy, but she desperately wanted to be in her own space, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of family life. The careful coordination required to transport her home while maintaining privacy was complex, involving multiple vehicles and carefully planned routes. Arriving home felt like both a victory and a new challenge. Catherine's regular routines were impossible now. Climbing stairs left her breathless, and the simple act of preparing the children's breakfast required help from others. The woman who had once managed multiple royal engagements in a single day now needed to rest after short conversations. This adjustment to a new reality was perhaps more difficult than the hospital stay, as it forced her to confront how fundamentally her life had changed. The children adapted to their mother's new limitations with the resilience that often surprises adults. They instinctively lowered their voices when playing near her room, and Charlotte appointed herself as the family's keeper of quiet activities, organizing puzzle sessions and drawing competitions that wouldn't tire their mother. Louis, too young to fully understand the situation, simply accepted that mommy needed more rest and adapted his requests for attention accordingly. William's role during this period was exhausting in ways he had never anticipated. He continued his royal duties when absolutely necessary, but his primary focus was managing Catherine's care, the children's routines, and the intense pressure from palace officials who needed guidance on how to handle the growing public and media interest in Catherine's condition. Sleep became elusive as he found himself checking on Catherine multiple times each night, listening for any sign that she might need help. The first oncology appointment approached like a deadline neither of them wanted to meet. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the specialist who would oversee Catherine's chemotherapy, had experience treating high-profile patients and understood the unique pressures they faced. However, she was also clear that successful treatment would require Catherine to prioritize her health above all other considerations, a demand that went against every instinct Catherine had developed as a working royal. As they prepared for this next phase of treatment, Catherine made a decision that would ultimately define her recovery journey. She would document her experience privately, not for publication but for her own understanding of what she was going through. This decision to bear witness to her own journey would later prove crucial in helping her find her voice again and ultimately share her story with the world. The night before her first chemotherapy session, Catherine sat in her private sitting room at Adelaide Cottage, surrounded by get-well cards from friends and family. One card, hand-drawn by Louis, showed a figure he identified as Mummy the superhero, complete with cape and crown. Looking at her son's innocent belief in her strength, Catherine felt something shift inside her. Perhaps she could be the superhero he believed her to be, just not in the way anyone expected. The chemotherapy suite at the Royal Marsden Hospital was nothing like Catherine had imagined. Instead of the sterile, frightening environment she had feared, she found comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, soft lighting, and other patients who greeted her arrival with knowing nods rather than royal protocol. Here, she was not the Princess of Wales, she was simply another person fighting for her life, and that anonymity became her first gift in this journey. Dr. Vasquez had prepared Catherine for many of the physical side effects of treatment, but nothing could have prepared her for the psychological impact of watching poison enter her bloodstream in the name of healing. During her first infusion, Catherine stared at the 4-line and thought about all the times she had visited cancer wards as part of her royal duties, offering comfort to patients whose experience she had never truly understood. The irony was not lost on her that she was now receiving the very treatments she had helped fundraise for. The chair next to Catherine's was occupied by Margaret Chen, a retired teacher who had been coming to the same infusion center for 6 months. Margaret treated Catherine exactly as she treated every new patient, with kindness, practical advice, and absolutely no special deference. This normal human interaction became precious to Catherine, who had spent years surrounded by people who were paid to agree with her or who wanted something from her. During their hours together in treatment, Margaret shared stories about her grandchildren, her garden, and her fears about the future. Catherine found herself opening up in ways she hadn't since university, talking about her real worries for her children and her struggles with feeling useful when she could barely get through a day without exhaustion. These conversations, unguarded and genuine, began to heal something in Catherine that had been damaged by years of careful public performance. The physical effects of chemotherapy arrived exactly as predicted. Catherine's famous hair, which had been photographed and analyzed by fashion magazines around the world, began falling out 2 weeks after her first treatment. She first noticed it on her pillow one morning, then, more dramatically, in the shower. William found her sitting on their bathroom floor, holding clumps of her hair and crying, not from vanity but from the visual proof that she was truly sick. The decision to cut her hair short before it could fall out completely became a family affair. Charlotte, with her artistic eye, helped choose a style that would look intentional rather than medical. George researched online to find photos of other women who looked beautiful with short hair. Louis, ever practical, suggested she could wear hats like his football coach. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of this change helped Catherine see it as just another adaptation rather than a loss. William struggled most with watching Catherine's physical transformation. The woman he had fallen in love with at university, who had walked confidently down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, was now often too tired to climb stairs without assistance. He found himself grieving not just for her illness but for the effortless partnership they had developed over years of royal duties. Everything now required planning, consideration of her energy levels, and backup plans in case she felt unwell. The children's schools were quietly informed of the family's situation, and teachers were asked to watch for any signs that the stress was affecting George, Charlotte, or Louis. Surprisingly, the children seemed to adapt more easily than the adults around them. They developed their own ways of helping. George took over walking the family dog, Charlotte organized quiet activities for when their mother rested, and Louis appointed himself chief joke teller, determined to make his mother laugh every day. Palace life had to be completely reorganized around Catherine's treatment schedule. Private secretaries who had managed her calendar around royal duties now coordinated with medical appointments. The red boxes of government papers that usually arrived daily for Catherine's review were suspended indefinitely. For someone whose identity had become inseparable from her work, this forced inactivity was as challenging as the physical symptoms of treatment. The media silence around Catherine's condition became increasingly difficult to maintain as weeks turned into months. Royal correspondents noted every cancelled engagement, analyzed the timing of William's solo appearances, and speculated endlessly about what could require such an extended absence. Social media amplified every theory, from the reasonable to the wild, creating a constant background noise of speculation that added stress to an already difficult situation. Amanda Foster, the palace communications director, found herself in daily discussions about how much longer they could maintain their current approach. Public interest was not diminishing; if anything, the lack of information was creating more intense scrutiny. Yet Catherine's doctors were clear that stress could negatively impact her recovery, and media attention was one of the greatest sources of stress in her life. The third month of treatment brought both a major setback and an unexpected breakthrough. Catherine's response to chemotherapy was slower than hoped, requiring adjustments to her treatment plan that extended the duration of her therapy. This news sent her into a period of depression that was as dangerous to her recovery as any physical symptom. For several weeks, she struggled to find motivation for treatment, questioning whether the fight was worth the suffering it required. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Louis, with the directness that only a 5-year-old possesses, asked his mother why she was so sad when everyone was working so hard to make her better. His question forced Catherine to articulate her fears and, in doing so, helped her realize that her despair was robbing her family of hope. If she gave up, what message was she sending to her children about facing life's challenges? Catherine's relationship with Margaret Chen deepened during this difficult period. Margaret had faced her own treatment setbacks and understood the psychological battle that accompanied the physical one. She introduced Catherine to other long-term patients who had learned to find joy and meaning even during the hardest parts of their treatment. These friendships, formed in the most unlikely circumstances, became Catherine's lifeline when royal duty and public expectations felt overwhelming. Dr. Vasquez suggested that Catherine consider speaking with a counselor who specialized in helping patients adjust to serious illness. Initially resistant to the idea, counseling felt too much like admitting weakness. Catherine eventually agreed when she realized her emotional state was affecting her family. These sessions, conducted in complete confidentiality, became the place where she could express fears and frustrations that she felt unable to share with anyone else. The counseling sessions revealed how much Catherine's identity had become tied to her ability to serve others. Without her royal duties, she struggled to feel valuable or purposeful. Working with her counselor, she began to understand that her worth as a person was separate from her ability to perform royal functions, a distinction she had never been forced to make before. This personal work became as important to her recovery as the medical treatment. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, but Catherine's treatment was entering its most difficult phase. Higher doses of chemotherapy were necessary to ensure the cancer did not return, but these came with more severe side effects. She lost more weight, experienced nausea that made eating difficult, and developed a sensitivity to light that made even brief outdoor time uncomfortable. Yet something in her spirit had strengthened during the psychological work of winter. The decision about when and how to eventually return to public life began to take shape during this period. Catherine knew she wanted to share her experience in some way, both to explain her absence and to help others facing similar battles. However, she also knew she needed to complete her treatment and regain her strength before taking on the emotional demands of public communication about such a personal journey. William noticed the change in Catherine's approach to her illness during this phase. Where she had once seen treatment as something to endure until she could return to her real life, she now seemed to view it as part of a larger journey toward understanding herself and her purpose. She began talking about what she might do differently when she did return to royal duties, how her experience might inform her choice of charities and causes. The children, too, had evolved through this experience. George had developed a mature understanding of what his mother was facing and often served as translator for his younger siblings when they didn't understand why Mommy couldn't do certain things. Charlotte had become fiercely protective of her mother's rest time, policing household noise levels with determination. Louis, still young enough to accept the situation without fully understanding it, had become everyone's source of lightness and laughter. As Catherine entered the final phase of her treatment, she began working on the words she would eventually use to tell her story. She wanted to be honest about the fear and difficulty without frightening others who might face similar diagnoses. She wanted to acknowledge the privilege that had made her treatment easier while recognizing the universal aspects of facing serious illness. Most importantly, she wanted to find a way to transform her most vulnerable experience into something that could help others. The woman who had once worried about saying the wrong thing in a royal engagement was now preparing to speak more honestly than any member of the royal family had ever spoken publicly. This transformation from perfect princess to authentic human being would prove to be the most important outcome of her entire ordeal. The decision to break her silence came on a Tuesday morning in early September, exactly 8 months after her surgery. Catherine woke feeling stronger than she had in months, and, for the first time since her diagnosis, she felt ready to face the world beyond the protective walls of Adelaide Cottage. Her final chemotherapy session was scheduled for the following week, and she knew the time had come to take control of her own narrative before others continued to write it for her. William found her in their private sitting room, writing in the journal she had kept throughout her treatment. The pages were filled with honest reflections about fear, hope, pain, and discovery, thoughts that had never been shaped by royal protocol or public relations considerations. As he read over her shoulder, he realized that Catherine had found something during her illness that she had never possessed during her years as a seemingly perfect princess: her authentic voice. The conversation about going public was unlike any they had shared before. Previously, major communications decisions were made in consultation with palace officials, royal correspondents, and sometimes even government representatives. This time, Catherine was firm that the message would be entirely her own. She would speak from her heart, in her own words, about her own experience. The royal machine could adapt to her truth rather than shaping her truth to fit royal expectations. Catherine's first call was to her parents, Carol and Michael Middleton. Throughout her illness, they had been her anchor to the person she was before tiaras and titles transformed her life. Carol, who had watched her daughter navigate the complexities of royal life for over a decade, immediately understood the significance of Catherine's decision to speak openly. Michael, ever practical, worried about the intensity of media attention this revelation would bring, but he also recognized the courage it took for his daughter to choose vulnerability over protection. The children were told about their mother's plan during their regular family dinner. Catherine explained that she wanted to tell people about being sick because it might help other families going through similar experiences. George, mature beyond his years, asked thoughtful questions about what this would mean for their privacy. Charlotte wanted to know if people would be sad when they heard the story. Louis, with characteristic 5-year-old directness, asked if this meant Mommy was definitely going to be okay now. Planning the announcement required a completely new approach from the palace communications team. Amanda Foster had spent her career crafting messages that revealed as little as possible while managing public expectations. Now she was being asked to help Catherine share one of the most personal experiences imaginable. The challenge was not what to say, but how to say it in a way that would be authentic to Catherine's voice while serving the public's need for information. Catherine insisted on writing the statement herself, without input from speechwriters or communications experts. She spent 3 days crafting and refining her words, reading them aloud to William and testing them against her own standard. Would this help someone else who was afraid? Every revision brought her closer to the honest, compassionate tone she wanted to achieve. This was not going to be a royal statement about health challenges, it was going to be a human story about facing fear and finding strength. The decision about how to deliver the message was equally important. Traditional royal announcements came through official palace statements or formal interviews with longtime royal correspondents. Catherine wanted something different, something that felt personal and direct. After much discussion, they decided on a video message that she would record in the gardens of Windsor Castle, a setting that felt both formal enough for a princess and intimate enough for a personal revelation. The recording day was carefully planned but emotionally overwhelming. Catherine had grown used to appearing in public during her royal duties, but this felt completely different. She was not playing the role of Princess of Wales, she was being Catherine Middleton, a wife and mother who had faced something terrible and wanted to share what she had learned. The vulnerability required for this performance was unlike anything she had ever attempted. The technical aspects of filming were handled by a small, trusted crew who had worked with the royal family before. However, the emotional aspects were entirely Catherine's to manage. She had practiced her words dozens of times, but speaking them while looking directly into a camera that would carry her message to millions of people around the world required a different kind of courage than she had ever needed. The first few takes were too formal, too much like her previous royal communications. Catherine recognized this and asked for a break to recenter herself. When filming resumed, she spoke as if she were talking to Margaret Chen during one of their chemotherapy sessions, or to a friend who needed to hear that it was possible to face the unthinkable and survive. This shift in mental approach transformed both her delivery and the power of her message. William watched from behind the cameras as his wife shared their most private ordeal with the world. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with at university, honest, thoughtful, and genuinely concerned for others, speaking truth in a way that royalty rarely attempted. The careful princess who had spent years avoiding any controversial statement was now revealing the most controversial topic possible, her own mortality and fear. The final version of Catherine's message was both shocking and comforting. She spoke about the fear of diagnosis, the challenge of telling her children, and the unexpected gifts that had come through her treatment. She talked about the medical team who had saved her life, the friends who had carried her through the darkest moments, and the family who had never stopped believing in her recovery. Most importantly, she spoke about hope and the possibility of finding meaning even in the most difficult experiences. Palace officials received an advance copy of the message 24 hours before its public release. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some worried about the precedent of such personal disclosure from a senior royal. Others recognized the power of Catherine's authenticity and the positive impact it could have on public understanding of both illness and recovery. Everyone understood that this announcement would fundamentally change how the royal family communicated about personal challenges. Media preparations for the announcement were unlike anything in recent royal history. Rather than managing a story, Palace Communications was facilitating Catherine's own storytelling. Broadcast partners around the world were provided with the video message simultaneously, ensuring that Catherine's words would reach global audiences without interpretation or editing. This direct communication bypassed traditional media filters and gave Catherine complete control over her narrative. The night before the announcement, Catherine could not sleep. She walked through the rooms of Adelaide Cottage, thinking about how different her life had been just months before. The woman who had once worried about every public word was about to share her deepest fears with the world. Yet instead of the anxiety she might have expected, she felt a profound sense of relief. The silence that had protected her privacy had also isolated her from the support and understanding she needed. William spent that sleepless night discussing last-minute concerns and preparations. They talked about how to handle the children's reactions to the public response, how to manage the intense media interest that would follow, and how to protect the privacy they would still need as Catherine completed her recovery. They also talked about the future, how this experience had changed their understanding of their roles and their marriage. The morning of the announcement, Catherine woke early and spent time in prayer and meditation. She thought about all the people who had supported her through this journey, from Dr. Crawford and Dr. Vasquez to Margaret Chan and her fellow patients. She thought about the letters she had written to her children that they would never need to read and the fear she had faced that had ultimately made her stronger. Most of all, she thought about the person she had become through this experience and how different she was from the princess who had entered the hospital so many months before. As the final preparations were made for releasing her message to the world, Catherine felt something she had not experienced in years of royal duty: complete alignment between her public role and her personal truth. For the first time since becoming Princess of Wales, she was about to share something that was entirely, authentically hers. The silence was about to end, and, with it, a new chapter of her life was about to begin. At exactly 6 p.m. on September 9, Catherine's video message was released simultaneously across every major broadcasting network and social media platform in the world. Within minutes, the carefully maintained secret of her cancer diagnosis became global news, but, this time, the story was being told in her own words, on her own terms. The woman who had disappeared from public life as a perfectly composed princess was returning as someone far more powerful, a survivor who had found her authentic voice. The immediate reaction was unprecedented in both scale and emotion. Social media platforms crashed temporarily under the weight of responses as millions of people around the world shared their own stories of facing cancer, losing loved ones to the disease, or simply finding inspiration in Catherine's courage to speak openly about her vulnerability. The hashtag Catherine Strong began trending within hours, but, more importantly, conversations about cancer, fear, and recovery were happening in households around the globe. Television networks cleared their evening programming to broadcast Catherine's message in full, followed by discussions with oncologists, royal experts, and cancer survivors. However, the most powerful responses came from ordinary people who saw themselves reflected in Catherine's words. Cancer treatment centers reported increased calls from patients who had been inspired by her message to seek help or continue difficult treatments. Her honesty had given permission for others to be honest about their own struggles. King Charles, who had faced his own health challenges, was among the first to respond publicly. His statement praised Catherine's remarkable courage and acknowledged how her openness had demonstrated the strength that comes from vulnerability. The monarch's support gave royal approval to Catherine's decision to break with traditional palace secrecy about personal matters, signaling a potential shift in how the modern monarchy might approach transparency. William's response was more personal but equally significant. Speaking at an impromptu appearance at a cancer research facility the following day, he talked about watching his wife face the greatest challenge of her life with grace and determination. His visible emotion as he spoke about their journey together showed the world a side of royal marriage that had never been seen before: genuine partnership in the face of life's most serious trials. The children's schools were inundated with messages of support, cards, and gifts from classmates and their families. George, Charlotte, and Louis suddenly found themselves at the center of an outpouring of love that they had never experienced in their young lives. Their teachers reported that the children seemed proud of their mother's courage, and Charlotte was overheard telling a friend that her mummy was the bravest person in the world for helping other sick people not be scared. Margaret Chen, Catherine's chemotherapy companion, found herself briefly in the media spotlight as journalists sought to understand who had supported the princess during her treatment. In interviews, Margaret spoke about the lovely young woman who had sat beside her during treatment, emphasizing that cancer was an equalizer that made everyone simply human. Her perspective reinforced Catherine's message that illness affects everyone regardless of status or privilege. Dr. Vasquez and the medical team at Royal Marsden received international recognition for their care of Catherine, but, more importantly, their hospital experienced a surge in research funding and treatment inquiries. Catherine's openness about her treatment had removed stigma and fear that often prevented people from seeking help. Medical professionals worldwide praised her contribution to cancer awareness and early detection advocacy. The most unexpected outcome was the transformation in how people viewed the royal family itself. Catherine's vulnerability had made the monarchy more relatable and human than years of careful public relations could achieve. Public opinion polls showed increased support for the royal family, but, more significantly, they showed increased trust in their authenticity. People felt they had been allowed to see the real person behind the title, and they responded with unprecedented warmth and support. Palace communications found themselves managing a completely different type of media attention. Instead of speculation and rumors, they were coordinating responses to genuine offers of help, support, and partnership. Cancer charities wanted Catherine as a patron, medical research facilities sought her involvement, and support organizations hoped she might lend her voice to their causes. The challenge shifted from protecting privacy to choosing how to use the platform her honesty had created. Catherine's first public appearance after her announcement was carefully chosen. She visited the Royal Marsden Hospital where she had received treatment, but this time as a patron rather than a patient. The symbolism was powerful. She was returning to the scene of her greatest vulnerability as someone who had been transformed by the experience. Her conversation with current patients was informed by her own journey in ways that no amount of preparation could have provided. The visit revealed how fundamentally Catherine's approach to royal duties had changed. Previously, she had excelled at asking thoughtful questions and showing appropriate concern, but there had always been a distance between her experience and that of the people she was trying to help. Now, when she spoke to cancer patients, she spoke as someone who understood their fear, their pain, and their hope from the inside. Her empathy was no longer performed, it was lived. Working with her medical team, Catherine developed a new approach to her royal role that incorporated her health journey. She became an advocate for early detection, honest communication about illness, and the importance of mental health support during medical treatment. Her platform was no longer just about appearing at events, it was about using her experience to create meaningful change in how society approached cancer care and support. The relationship with William had also been transformed by their shared experience. Friends noticed that they communicated differently, touched each other more naturally, and seemed less concerned with maintaining perfect public composure. They had faced the possibility of loss together and emerged with a deeper appreciation for their partnership. Their marriage, once scrutinized for signs of fairy tale perfection, was now admired for its genuine resilience. Catherine's return to full royal duties was gradual and intentional. She chose engagements that aligned with her new understanding of her role and declined others that felt performative rather than meaningful. The woman who had once tried to excel at every royal expectation was now selective about where she invested her energy. This authenticity made her more effective, not less, as people responded to her genuine engagement with causes she truly cared about. The annual Trooping the Colours ceremony became a celebration not just of the king's birthday but of Catherine's recovery. Standing on the Buckingham Palace balcony with her family, she looked different from the perfectly composed princess who had appeared at the same event in previous years. Her smile was softer, her posture more relaxed, and her interaction with her children more natural. The crowd's response was overwhelmingly emotional, with many people visibly moved by her presence. A year after her diagnosis, Catherine published a memoir about her experience titled Finding My Voice, A Journey Through Darkness to Light. The book became an international bestseller, with proceeds supporting cancer research and patient support programs. More importantly, it continued the conversation she had started with her video message, encouraging others to find strength in their own vulnerability and to seek help when facing life's greatest challenges. The memoir revealed details that had been too personal for her initial announcement. She wrote about the night terrors that had accompanied her early treatment, the guilt she felt about burdening her family, and the unexpected joy she had found in small moments during her recovery. She also wrote about the spiritual journey that had accompanied her physical healing, and how facing mortality had clarified what truly mattered in her life. Catherine's cancer journey had begun as a private crisis that threatened everything she thought she knew about her life and role. It ended as a public testimony to the power of honesty, vulnerability, and authentic human connection. The princess who had spent years perfecting the art of saying nothing meaningful had discovered that her most important message came from sharing her deepest truth. The woman who returned to public life was fundamentally different from the one who had been diagnosed with cancer. She had lost her hair, her sense of invulnerability, and her belief that she had to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. In return, she had gained her authentic voice, deeper relationships, and a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. The silence had been broken, and in its place was something far more powerful, the truth, spoken with courage, compassion, and hope. Standing in the gardens of Adelaide Cottage on the anniversary of her diagnosis, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had once feared saying the wrong thing had learned that saying the right thing, her own truth, was more powerful than any carefully crafted royal statement could ever be. Her silence had ended, but her real voice had just begun.